There are many observances and customs that are indigenous to the Camarilla, most of which are shrouded in tradition and antiquity. However, the exact procedurals of these customs have gotten a bit foggy at times, and there are certain penalties attached to breaking the traditions. But how these penalties are enforced and what they are is something of a mystery. As mentioned before, embrace is the process of creating a vampire from a mortal. The right to embrace is jealously guarded by the elders of the Camarilla, who fear both overcrowding and the prospect of a sea of neonites seeking elder vitae. The Masquerade presents the effort to hide vampire existence from the world and implies that the more vampires there are, the harder it is to hide them. Even with the fact, one of the basic drives of vampires is to create more vampires, and as a result, Camarilla has come up with an ornate procedural for obtaining permission to embrace. A vampire who wants to create progeny needs to go directly to the top, namely the prince, who holds the right of creation and destruction. It is within his power to bestow the right to create children as a reward for exceptional service. The right of creation is often used as a political leverage and is granted or denied depending on the situation. Once the right of creation is granted, it is often announced in public or Elysium and it cannot be rescinded. The rewarded kindred has as long as he wishes to exercise this boon. The basics of kindred embrace are simple, but of course there can always be problems, complications, mistakes and tragedies, and that can have a backlash effect on vampire trying to embrace a mortal. Prestation is one of the most important customs to the modern Camarilla, and the procedure itself is one of the backbones of the sect. A vampire who enters a city must present himself to the prince and ask for permission to stay, which the prince can't deny. This gives the prince clear insight into who resides within his domain, and it reinforces the power dynamic between the prince and the subject. Refusing to follow the procedure causes a visit from the sheriff or a scourge, which may be very unpleasant. If the newcomer doesn't know where the prince is and where to go, he may find himself in potential trouble. Even if he makes a serious effort to learn where the Elysium is or other kindred, the sheriff or scourge may not take pity or have understanding and can immediately treat him as hostile. On a deep down predatory level, every vampire wants to be the only one and at the top of the food chain. However, acting on that instinct violates Camarilla's laws, which strictly forbid the killing of another vampire. Committing such a crime is unforgivable, and the only punishment for it is final death, which is performed swiftly, deadly, and publicly. The reason for such draconian punishment is simple. Camarilla can't afford to lose its members from within, in the wake of all the enemies that surround them and wait for weaknesses to appear. The rules about murder change when the victim is not a member of the Camarilla. Sabbat vampires are fair game, and the more dead Sabbat there are, the happier Camarilla authorities are. However, dealing with the independent clans is a bit trickier, and while Camarilla doesn't really care about them, it doesn't want to alienate them, or worse, make enemies out of them. So each case is dealt separately. There are kindred whose titles give them a license to kill, such as sheriffs and scourges, but even they cannot just go around killing scot-free. The main reason why vampires get the urge to kill others is blood. Kindred vitae is more potent, it tastes better, and it can temporarily increase powers of the vampire who drinks it. The next step from that is diablerie, and the vampire committing it can expect nothing less than final death if caught. When it comes to dealing with diablerie on the outsiders, sometimes on special circumstances it can be looked over, but since kindred can absorb abilities from other powerful kindred through diablerie, elders of the Camarilla take no risks, and princes make a spectacle out of the offender's death in order to send a message to anyone who thinks trying it. Camarilla's traditions are clear, but every city has its own approach to them, and princes generally have carte blanche when it comes to creating legislation. Back in the day they had absolute authority, but with modern times their responsibilities expanded, and tasks of law enforcement were spread onto more kindred, mainly sheriffs and keepers of Elysium. The sheriff doesn't patrol the city looking for lawbreakers. Law enforcement often runs on tips and information, and that is the same way that the transgressors are caught. The sheriff doesn't chase another vampire through the streets breaking the masquerade in order to preserve it. If the transgressor is lucky, he can be caught by his sire before the official authorities get to him. Publicly, the sire does as much possible to sweep things under the rug or at least soften the blow. Because the action of his child can backfire on him, he uses status and favors to patch things up. But behind the closed doors, he has absolute freedom to teach his child a lesson and make certain that that doesn't happen ever again. And depending on the sire's fading humanity, punishments can be very severe. Trials depend entirely on the whim of the prince and precedent. There is nothing in the traditions or laws that gives an accused any sort of rights, and the prince may choose not to give the accused right to speak nor defend himself. However, there is something of a lawyer in the night court, and allies of the accused and clan members may choose to defend him on trial. But that is risky business, because if the accused is found guilty, they can lose titles, status, privileges, or can even go down with him. There is also a question of who is being accused. If a prince attempts to bring an elder to trial, who may choose not to recognize his authority, then a prince may appeal to a justicar for assistance, whereupon the justicar determines if the charges merit a conclave. On the other hand, if the prince breaks the law, the matter is considered one for the conclave, no questions asked. Punishments in the kindred society are very public and meant to drive home a message about the wheels of justice and the Camarilla's willingness to use any means to keep order. Depending on the severity of the crime, punishments can be divided into social, physical, and creative. The Conclave is the greatest event in the vampire politics to which every vampire can be privy, and serves many purposes for the Camarilla. It serves as the highest court of the Camarilla kindred, a legislative body which chooses the Camarilla's direction and place in both mortal and vampire societies. It is a place for elders to meet with other of their station, Antilia and Neonites to meet with their friends, clanmates, and new kindred to socialize and venture into the world of vampire politics on a grand scale. Conclave is also one of the few perks that continues to keep young vampires from defecting to anarchs and sabbat or simply abandoning the Camarilla altogether, as it is a place and time when the young can speak directly to their elders and have a chance of being heard, as well as having an opportunity to vote on the direction that the Camarilla takes. Only a justicar can call a conclave, and they call them to deal with dire circumstances, individuals or situations that threaten or regard the Camarilla as a whole. And some are called as trials for powerful kindred in order to contain destructive quarrels between elders or deposing of princes. As it can be imagined, conclaves can be logistical nightmares for even the most experienced hosts. Conclaves are usually announced first in Elysium about a month before, but the location of the meeting is kept a secret for as long as possible. A gossip about the false location can also be spread in order to avoid the potential attack from the enemy. But some more absent or isolated members of the Camarilla may not hear the true or changed location, and there had been a situation where unfortunate kindred had fallen right into Sabbat's trap. The head of security is handpicked by the justicar who calls the conclave, and the security chief may choose deputies to assist him. These individuals are usually selected for their broad range of skills and abilities. Due to immense danger that surrounds the conclave, security has the right to detain nearly anyone who is causing disturbance, and many justicars grant security license to use deadly force against any enemies of the conclave. Often, the prince loans security a certain use of his powers, such as contacts in the police force and city administration, to assist during the conclave. In modern nights, younger vampires have brought the security up to date with discreetly placed metal detectors, heat sensors, infrared and closed-circuit cameras. While some elders are disturbed by such technological toys, they can't deny their effectiveness. Many times, security procures the services of the harpists to assist with certain matters of etiquette to ensure that things go smoothly and quietly. Vampires traveling to Conclave come by literally every means available to them. Prince of the hosting city makes sure that his guests are accommodated and that they have safe arrival and resting location. Depending on the subject and the size of the conclave, organization can be planned even a couple of years before. Prince secures the city from any potential troublemakers and insurgents. He can build a hotel or a building specifically for that event. It is preferable that hosting cities are busy and with an ongoing event or events. However, some cities have refused the honor to host cities due to the matter of safety or inability to support so many visiting number of vampires. Conclave follows a very specific order based on an ancient judicial and monarchical court systems. The result is somewhat staid and slow but effective administration in action. Seating is traditionally based on age, with gathered harpies assigned to monitor the proceedings. The seating priority is not viewed with humor, and elders take the matter with serious importance. The hosting justicars opens the proceedings and addresses the assembly, informing them of the business at hand and what must be accomplished at conclave. Kindred who want to speak must have at least 2 supporters from the assembly. Speakers are expected to talk in a reasonable tone and not interrupt one another. Arguments may become passionate, but heckling and violence is not tolerated, and security chief immediately inserts himself into the matter to ensure that things cool down or to remove the troublesome party. Voting on issues is a simple matter. Each member of the assembly gets 1 vote. This perks proffered to the young serves the purpose of achieving a sense of control and involvement with the younger ones. They are provided with an essentially false feeling of having a choice, and wise leaders do not try to take that away from them. A conclave called for purposes of trial or a single matter is usually accomplished relatively swiftly and dispersed without too much fanfare. Most kindred scholars can date Lex Talionis back to the time of Cain, as it follows the Old Testament precept of eye for an eye. Among the youth, this practice is called the blood hunt. The Lex Talionis is tied directly to the 6 traditions from its inception. The blood hunt may be called for numerous crimes including kinslaying, diablerie, wild-scale and international continuation of the Masquerade breach, and any behavior deemed a sufficient threat to the safety of the Masquerade and the kindred of the city. Calling a blood hunt is the prince's prerogative, and any other elder who attempts to call it may and will be punished with the prince's tradition-given right. The hunt is formally declared in Elysium, and then the news are spread from there. The prince has the right to order active participation of every kindred in the city, but mostly just not stepping in the way of the pursuers is enough. The blood hunt is not called lightly, and every prince calling the hunt does so with full knowledge that the Camarilla may examine their judgment. If the prince calls too many hunts, or if too many kindred complain about his prerogative, Justicar may choose to call a conclave and have the prince in question examined, saddled with an anchor, or deposed. Tradition calls that once the blood hunt is called, it cannot be stopped. If the hunted party is proven innocent after the fact, while the hunt cannot be called off, certain measures are taken in reparation and the pursuit of the quarry may be less vigorous. Convenient window of opportunity to escape the city may be left in order to compensate for the misbegotten hunt. Needless to say, the prince may use this right to exile and eliminate his rivals, demonstrate his princely power, or just exercise his sadistic tendencies. If his true intentions are found out, he will be deposed rather quickly, sometimes even before the conclave. But if the prince plays his cards right, if he has enough friends and favors in the correct places, he can strengthen his position. One of the hardest parts of any blood hunt is the preservation of the masquerade during the chase. Hunted parties often rip the masquerade wide open during their flight, but his pursuers, especially if they are younger, may also breach the masquerade. Another thing is also diablerie. That is most often treated with sort of benign neglect, but it also may draw down the prince's ire. If the target of the hunt has potent vitae, the prince may declare diablerie off limits. There are many ways and techniques in which hunters hunt their target, and the more they cooperate, the better are their chances. However, no hunter wants to share the spoils of the victory with anyone else, and greed tends to keep the hunting parties small. The red list is something like the Kindred's most wanted list. Vampires on this list, called the Anathema, are the most grievous, powerful and troublesome offenders of the Camarilla. They are in short monsters of the vampire world whose crimes are of a legendary nature. If the Archons and Justicars are the law enforcement agencies of the Camarilla, the Alastors are the secret police. Moving unseen and unnoticed through the Camarilla, they serve a variety of purposes at the Inner Circle's command. Mostly, however, the Alastors hunt the Anathema relentlessly. Alastors are usually Archons of exceptional talent who are secretly recruited by the Inner Circle into their secret service. Even among the elite Alastors there are degrees of eliteness. The best of the best, once we have taken down Anathema from the top 5 positions on the red list, are called Red Alastors, and they exercise greater authority and powers than their fellows. Every Alastor who destroys an Anathema receives the trophy, a tattoo of ink and blood on the right palm. The trophy can never leave the vampire's flesh, and that is their mark of the trade recognizable to high-ranking Archons and other sufficiently trained kindred, even through the gloves which Alastors often carry. This flaw was built into the trophy so that someone could watch the Camarilla's watchmen. If there are any defectors, they can easily be found and destroyed. However, there are benefits to the trophy that grant immunity and automatic aid from anyone who is in the position to know what the mark means. The rewards include immunity to blood hunts, the severance of any existing blood bonds, permission to create progeny, a life boon, financial and territorial rewards, sanctioned diablerie under certain circumstances, instruction in disciplines, amnesty for past transgressions, clan friendship, safe passage, hospitality, feeding rights and haven, retainers and permission to create ghouls. Not all of these rewards are given to every Alastor, nor are all of the rewards announced. Hunting of the red list is not a duty restricted to the Alastors. Theoretically, every Camarilla vampire's duty is to hunt those monsters. However, Alastors are provided with resources and support to make a full-time go of it. A hunter who brings down a member of the red list gets the trophy and is also granted all of her prey's possessions. As Anathema are usually quite old and very powerful, their effects can turn out to be quite valuable. However, the hunter is not allowed to diablerize the Anathema. The Inner Circle takes great care to spread rumors about taints and diseases that runs through these creatures' vitae, warning younger vampires away from drinking or even touching it. It is not easy to get on the red list. Only the worst of the worst make it to the list. The vampires whose whispered names freeze even the Elder's blood. In order to put a name on the list, the Justicars of 2 clans must agree to prosecute this action. The vampire's crimes are read to the assembled Justicars and other witnesses, and then the document of Anathema is signed and a new name is added to the list. Once a vampire is put on the red list, the only way off it is death. Camarilla claims hegemony over all vampires, including the ones who don't want to be a part of it. So the official doctrine is that the Sabbat doesn't exist. Regardless of the technicalities, Sabbat is real and it is out there, as are the Lupins and all other enemies hell-bent on the destruction of the Camarilla. Camarilla is at constant war for its very survival, and as a result it has been forced to create tactics and strategies for every possible contingency. Not to be mistaken, Camarilla's approach on the battlefield is very effective, and she has not survived for half the millennium because she was lucky. Camarilla has withstood many turbulent times and events, and its generals and tacticians are very good at their jobs, because if they are not, the price of failure is extinction. On a grand scale, the Camarilla strategy is much the same as the Roman Empire was. The idea is to assimilate rather than conquer, and the end result is to make the world Camarilla. Camarilla doesn't engage Sabbat on the streets from city to city. First of all, it poses a threat for the Masquerade bridge, making it a bigger problem. Secondly, while the average Camarilla vampire is older and more powerful than its average Sabbat counterpart, Sabbat has the numbers and can overwhelm them. Except for the rare occasions, Camarilla uses a more subtle approach. Camarilla likes to use its resources, ghouls and pawns to weaken or neutralize the threat during the day. They can scout for enemy locations and hide out and can destroy their havens while they are asleep in it. The idea is to eliminate Sabbat advantage in numbers and combat effectiveness and put the Camarilla in the position of strength. Essentially, it is a process of slow submission where the goal is to strangle the Sabbat out of the city and then move in, and that is much better than fighting for it in the streets. Unfortunately, there are few occasions these days when the Camarilla can afford to go on the offense, and it is more focused on its defense. While Europe is in the perpetual stalemate, fierce battles are raging in North America and Camarilla is slowly losing them. On the East Coast, Sabbat is taking city after city, waging its war of attrition. On the West Coast, anarch-free states, who are ultimately friendly to the Camarilla, are being overrun by Cathayan invaders. To the south squats the Sabbat stronghold of Mexico City, and to the north lie endless forests and acres of tundra that the remaining Lupins call home. So in the North America, the Camarilla is in a box that gets smaller and tighter with each passing night. As a result, Camarilla is focused on defending and keeping its enemies from infesting any more of their territory rather than driving the Sabbat out of the occupied territories. Moreover, the Camarilla strategy is focused on a big scale rather than a small. Individuals are ultimately expendable, and the place and the sect is what really matters. In the end, Sabbat must be kept out of the cities and sect must be maintained. All else is to be sacrificed for that goal. Camarilla has never been a military organization and it doesn't have standing army of vampires waiting for the call of battle. In most cities, sheriff is responsible for safeguarding the city and he may deputize other kindred to help him. But in reality, situations like that often end by plucking neonites from the streets and pressing them into service. Prince is there to come up with an overall strategy and establish the priority of who and what needs to be protected and what is expendable. The rest is left with the sheriff and his tactics. If the prince is fighting in the streets himself, then everything is already gone to hell. Camarilla knows that it doesn't have resources for a multiple front war, and with that in mind, Camarilla makes a conscious effort to turn his enemies on one another, or at least keep them off balance, to the point where they come one at a time rather than all at once. To that end, Camarilla makes more than occasional deals with the devil, bargaining and making short-term alliances, keeping in mind the dangers that come with it. It is rare for Camarilla to go on an all-out offense, and is more focused on ruthlessly protecting its territories. The cities are more valuable than any individual vampire. While younger vampires don't understand the sanctity of territory, wise elders who have played this game for more than half a millennium are the ones who know better. Every city is an armory, source of supply and new recruits. Even more, since the vampires are creatures of habit and prefer security and comfortable surroundings, loss of home is also a loss of identity. Therefore, Camarilla defends its own territory with the fury of a lioness defending her cubs. In truth, Camarilla almost welcomes frontal assault from the Sabbat. While it may destroy property, resources, or other kindred, the enemy is visible, recognizable, and ultimately driven off. Infiltration by deep cover Sabbat operatives, on the other hand, is every prince's nightmare. The slow subversion may destroy a city that is strong enough to withstand any frontal assault. Therefore, most princes have in place elaborate counterintelligence measures. Sabbat is not the only enemy of the Camarilla, just the most prominent and the most dangerous one. However, the conflicts with the Independents, Lupins, and other supernaturals rarely require all-out war. Instead, just occasional conflicts are the norm. Both Lupins and the Camarilla know the rules of the game they play. Cities belong to vampires, and the country belongs to the Lupins. Anyone who trespasses is fair game. While both Camarilla and Sabbat could crush the Independents one at a time, the victor would be left severely weakened and an easy prey for the other sect. Also, Independents could be a valuable ally on the scales of conflict, so dealing with them is tricky. Camarilla often overlooks trespasses that would not be tolerated if a member of the Camarilla would commit the same. Every now and then some independents do something that arouses Camarilla's anger enough to provoke Camarilla into action, but those are individual cases, and the rest are just finished with politics. While power is the true currency of the Camarilla, boons and favors also play a big role. And the process of trading, repaying and incurring favors, called prestation, is the lifeblood of a Pyrrhic economy. A wise vampire will grant favors and a foolish one will incur them, and more often than not find himself a slave to his obligations towards the favors he owes. The process of racking up a prestation debt is a simple one. Either a vampire asks for help in a certain matter in return for a favor of some sort at a later date, or a vampire renders assistance in some crisis with understanding that his help will be repaid later. Sensible kindred keep very close tabs on who owes them and who they owe a debt, because prestation's debts can be literally called at any time. However, not all debts are incurred voluntarily. Elders and cunning kindred can maneuver other kindred, especially younger ones, into a position where they have no choice but to call for a favor, and by that put themselves into his creditor's thrall. Expert players of the game of prestation have many tricks up their sleeve, and naive or desperate kindred easily fall into their debt. It is not in the vampire's best interest to immediately cash in the favor he has acquired, because for one, his debtor is the first suspect if the vampire disappears or gets killed. Safety is not the only reason, because the kindred who owes a debt is not as free as he can be otherwise, and that can be used in a variety of political maneuverings. Furthermore, prestation have a social value, because a kindred who owes a favor is perceived as inferior to the one whom she owes. Once the debt is discharged, it is socially permissible for an abused debtor to take vengeance on an overly harsh creditor. Few kindred like the idea of having lingering debts. Kindred attempt to pay off their prestation debts in any way they can as soon as possible, and their creditors dodge anything that might be construed as kindness for their debtors. The result can be a game of cat and mouse. Debts among the kindred rarely take a specific shape and are intentionally left vague, as the debtor never knows what they might be asked for. The type and form of payback depends on the size of the debt incurred. Asking for too much can be laughed and called off, and asking for too little can be ridiculed by the harpies in the social circles. When debt is repaid, more often than not it is done so publicly. And as with everything else, kindred trade prestation debts and can be constantly swapped in between kindred that it can be dizzying to keep track of who owes what to whom. In the end, no kindred is obliged by the law to repay his debt and can easily refuse to pay his creditor. However, that can be a bigger threat than actually owing a favor. A vampire does not become better with age like a fine wine. Certainly more cunning, influential, powerful, and feared, but never better. What began as a fate worse than death becomes only more appalling with time. While his body doesn't rot, from inside he is rotten, bitter, and monstrous. As time passes, it reduces the elder vampires to similarity, and while they are not the same, they do share more in common with each other than they do with their children. Throughout the history, they have seen the repetitive nature of humans and younger, power-hungry kindred, and they had time to learn from the mistakes of others. One might imagine that lordly, immortal monsters with immense powers, abilities, and knowledge would fear nothing and would rule and crush into submission anything that stands in their way. But quite the contrary, elders know that there are many horrors in this world that defy logic and imagination, and that they would be smart to fear it. Through the ages, by their fault or not, they have acquired many enemies, and even without that, the mere fact that they are old makes them a target for younger, power-hungry kindred and other elders. So secrecy and fear is their second nature. With that distrust towards anything new, the elders fear the modern times that seem to gain more and more speed, leaving quickly behind those who cannot follow. Once things change with a much slower pace and even at their command, they jealously held and guarded their knowledge, power and wealth, But with the coming of the machine age, the kind has gained the powers of speed, steel and wealth and has left them behind in the dust. Humanity lost respect for tradition and flowed into cities, leaving the desolate countryside to the lupins and elders without the connection to the human world. The computer age makes things complicated to understand and even more complicated to hide and keep secrets. Another worrying thing is that this new world is the one in which younger, odious kindred grew up, and with it they share the human delusion that technology and changing times can be their servants. This weakness of mind and character makes them think that they are capable of independence and are owed equality, but that only pushes them to rebellious and anarchic ways. The younger kindred resent the time-tested guidance of their elders and infest the Camarilla with their fallible thinking. Elders compound this situation by turning children against children in an endless game of manipulation, deception, and intrigue. Diablerie is the only secure way up the ladder, and elders are aware of that. But in comparison to a power-hungry ancilla without no loyalty, the fast-changing times are much scarier. The kind tinkering with science will inevitably create some threat to kindred, and in combination with some impudent neonite who thinks it is his time to rule, that is the elder's worst nightmare. In opposition to nightmares about changing world and rebellious neonites, their fear of Methuselahs is real and rational. Methuselahs certainly exist and purposefully hide from the elders' best attempts at scrutiny and play deep games as elders with their bonds. The elders' fear of Methuselahs is a fear of their own reflection, as they would be doing the same if they're in their position. Even more hateful and scary is the memory of the antediluvians, their powerful fathers who can unmake nations and roil the surface of the world even from deep concealed torpor. With prophecy after prophecy from the Book of Nod manifesting in these end times, the elders are torn and trapped in between believing the rumors that the antediluvians are gone and fearing to undermine the traditions of lineage that hold the Camarilla together under their tutelage. Even greater threat than the young and the eldest is the actual and ongoing threat of their elder fellows. With their every wrong move being waited for and every alliance not being permanent, each elder knows that in the end he must triumph or die under the talons of his fellows. Even with the unease amongst each other, the fear of their peers is second to the terror of the Black Hand and the heresy that is Sabbat. Sabbat openly wishes the destruction of Camarilla elders and drowning of kindred society in fire and blood. It disregards every Camarilla's law in these new times of anarchy and disregard of traditions. The Sabbat spreads like a disease. Yet that is not all. Sabbat also brings the fear of the beast that lurks deep within every vampire himself. Every repressed desire, fantasy, privilege, and thirst denied for being too risky returns with whispers of Sabbat's seductive call, where you're free to be your complete and true nature. That temptation that every elder fears is even scarier when they know that the same lure of Sabbat is felt by ancillae and neonites who are more prone to be seduced by their dark desires that Sabbat promises. Sabbat know that Camarilla members feel this urge and they use it, especially on the younger children who are more prone to risk everything for the taste of the powerful vintage vitae. Even without Sabbat and other fellow members, the elders still face the risk of destruction. The memory of medieval fires of the Inquisition is still very vivid. Their pride was proven to be suicidal, and now they have to shamefully hide from the cattle, ruling from the shadows instead of ruling with their fists. While mortals are weak and easily corrupted, their numbers are just too great, and they cannot risk being revealed in these modern times where information spreads quickly. The older the vampire gets, the more things he has to fear, and elders hate everything they fear. They cannot move without making a new enemy and can't even treat their peers with respect, because to show a genuine feeling is to show weakness that others will certainly use against them. So rather than a band of brothers, the society of Camarilla is a den of vipers, a poisoned garden bearing corrupt fruit. The only resource left for the elders is hatred, and millennia of practice has made them good at it. They never forget and never forgive, not even the tiniest things. Some would even argue that their hatred is what gives their unlives meaning. Jealousies and lies, spite and intrigue, gossip and innuendos. These are all part of the Elder's arsenal. Camarilla society functions as a zero-sum game. For every winner, there is at least one loser, and nobody wants to be a loser. One of the fundamental differences between Camarilla and Sabbat is their policy about working with and through mortals. Camarilla's willingness to work with mortals is seen through their reliance of half-human class of creatures called Ghouls. Camarilla does not only rely on them, but they are an integral part of Camarilla's existence, survival, and function. They are Camarilla's extended hand during the day that keeps the Masquerade, guards her from external and internal enemies, protects her resources, and even attacks her enemies. A ghoul is a mortal that has ingested kindred vitae. While the term ghoul usually refers to a human being, in general it is used for any sort of animal or living being that has been made into a ghoul. Becoming a ghoul has many benefits, like slowed aging, increased strength, speed and stamina, faster healing, and a chance to learn some basic vampiric disciplines. However, the deal comes with its drawbacks. With the ghoul's abilities comes a slavering addiction to vitae and the inevitable outcome of being blood-bond. Once becoming a ghoul, there is no returning back. The only two options are hopes of being embraced or remain being a ghoul. Only other option is death, because the Camarilla doesn't want to take the chance of breaking the Masquerade. While traditions prevent most of the Camarilla's members to embrace mortals at will, there is no official limit on creating ghouls. However, there is some common sense limit over which it starts to raise eyebrows of other kindred, and also the fact that there is only a certain amount of vitae that a kindred can give in order to sustain the addiction of ghouls. So, potential ghouls are selected by three factors: mortal's position, talent, and availability. Mortals who are in key positions in whatever area are very useful and sought after. Ghouls in highest places and positions can be used to exert Camarilla's or individuals' power and influence. Ghouls with specific skill sets are used for handling kindred's desired or needed affairs, and their use can be long-term or temporary. And finally, there are also ghouls who are brought into the kindred society for a variety of personal reasons and don't serve kindred for any specific need, but rather for their own satisfaction. Ghouls are used for a wide variety of tasks, usually too menial, repetitive, or dangerous for the kindred to attend to. Ghouls are seen as servants and therefore as expendable, but there are some who are very valued, especially if the ghoul has decades of experience in service to his master. Ghouls can procure kindred sustenance, keep their secrets and valued resources, gather valuable information, and even hunt other kindred. As a matter of fact, ghouls are very often used for confrontation with the enemy, because they can be a buffer for the waves of the Sabbat, because they can attack and hunt their enemy during the day, and because they can more easily protect the Masquerade. Invaluable yet inferior. That is what sums up the ghoul's place in the Camarilla. The sect would literally crumble were it to be deprived of their half-human servants. However broken, corrupt, and misguided, the world without the Camarilla would certainly be a much darker and scarier place. Like, share, and subscribe so that we could spread the darkness together. But until then, don't fear the dark, but find power.